The three wise men predicted God's maturity. 60, 40, and 20 were the ages of the three wise men. These particular three men were also astrologists. They studied the positioning of the planets. That's how they were able to predict Jesus' birth. But their purpose was truly greater than predicting Jesus' birth. They predicted God's maturity. The meaning of the three wise men was all about who they were, what they brung, and why they came. Each man is described as a different person. If many of you don't know, there were three different men, of three different backgrounds, carrying three different items, and those items represented three different things. First, let's discuss who the three men were. Their names were Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. Caspar was 60 years old, with a white beard. He also brought gold as his gift. He came from Turkey and was the first to kneel to Christ. Melchior was middle-aged. He was the 40-year-old. His gift was frankincense. He came from Arabia. Balthazar was very young. He was the 20-year-old. He is described as being very dark-skinned. His gift was myrrh from Africa. Each man came bringing a gift, and yes, their gift has meaning, but let's first pay attention to the age of these men because that also has very deep meaning. Each man was a different age because they represent the different ages of God. 60, 40, 20. The gifts all had meaning, but it wasn't just their gift, it was their ages. Why would three different men, each of a different generation, come from three different regions, carrying three different gifts? They all believed in the same thing, they all studied the planets, and they all predicted the same. They all brought gifts, the only difference between them was their age. It's because their age was the real message. Their age held the real meaning. Each age represented an age of God, each age represented a stage of God. Each age of man showed gratitude. Each man represented a version of God. I also want to highlight that these men were astrologists. Their prediction came solely from the placement of the planets and stars. Not only was their prediction right, their purpose was much greater than predicting Jesus' birth. Their particular study led to the most accurate probability. When they set out on their mission from their particular country, they didn't know each other. I thought they all came from the same place, but they didn't. They came from different regions. They set out on their mission with a purpose, and that purpose was much deeper than many imagine. Now let's talk about the gifts. All three gifts are ordinary offerings and gifts given to a king. Myrrh being commonly used as an anointing oil, frankincense as a perfume, and gold as a valuable. The three gifts had a spiritual meaning, gold as a symbol of kingship on earth, frankincense as a symbol of deity, and myrrh as a symbol of death. Gold, as to a king, myrrh, as to one who was mortal, and incense, as to a god. Those gifts weren't actually gifts to Jesus, or to Mary for Jesus' birth. Those gifts were for God. Those gifts symbolized God's maturity. Each man represented a stage of God's existence. Their gift signified growth, and it celebrated God's fatherhood. It should be compared to a baby shower. They came as gifts for the child, but they were actually gifts for the father, to congratulate him on achieving such a great accomplishment. Also pay attention to what part of the Bible this was in. The New Testament. The New Testament is a testament to God's maturity. It's a written account of God's growth. That's why it differs from the Old Testament. The Old Testament was a testament to God's anger, wrath, and jealousy. But the New Testament isn't. The Bible is a book of God's growth, as a God, Father, and a husband. These men knew, these men understood. What's so amazing is these men were never considered Christians, or Jews. They were considered to be Magi's. or astrologist, they studied the stars and planets, not religion. Their study gave them the most profound prophecy: Jesus' birth, God's fatherhood, and maturity. What the Bible calls a sin turned out to be a direct line of communication from God to his people. What these men did pleased God. What they did was for God. What they did foretold something many people paid no attention to. It's so amazing to understand these things on such a deeper level. Many thought these men were praising Jesus, but they were actually praising God. They were acknowledging God's ability, God's love, God's surety. God is so worthy to be celebrated and praised. Many people refused to listen to this message. They refused to acknowledge God's maturity. When he became a father, he matured, and these men understood and acknowledged his growth. We're supposed to do the same thing. When you only acknowledge God's anger and wrath from the Old Testament, you're not acknowledging his growth. When you only pray for God to kill, destroy, and do away with this planet, you're not acknowledging his maturity. God's capabilities are much bigger than we imagine. His reach is greater also. If these astrologists were able to understand God through planets, it would mean his reach is further than we understand. These men were right. Their predictions were accurate. That means their study is also. That would mean astrology is not evil. That would mean the Bible is filled with astrology. That would mean the planets actually do serve purposes in understanding God's nature and traits. The planets have meaning. Not only is that meaning accurate, it all helps us to understand. Each planet has a trait, and each planet is either masculine or feminine. They predicted his birth from the alignment of particular feminine and masculine planetary alignments. There was also a star. That star led them to Jesus. It glowed until they arrived. Each man followed that star. They came from different places, but at some point they all ended up coming together. That's the message. The different ages comes from different time periods, but at the end they come together to produce something magical. Jesus' birth signified God's maturity, just as well as his death. Every major event in the Bible signifies God's maturity. Ours and his. The more we grow, he does also. All of God's creations, especially ones like planets and stars, are always in alignment with God. They always display his nature and character. He always uses them to communicate with us. Many miss it, and many missed this. The three wise men didn't.